pain is worse. If it...
Cases of depression have been surging over the past few years.
We see over 5 million Americans living with this disease, and those numbers are projected to just skyrocket.
That's pulling down our average life expectancy, and so are deaths by suicide, the highest rate in at least 50 years. Studies show as many as 300,000 preschoolers have depression and are at risk of having it all through their lives.
Something is very, very wrong here. How is it that over 26% of adults in America are suffering from a diagnosable mental disorder, or that over the last decade, depression rates rose 18%, and now it's estimated that 322 million people around the world suffer from depressive disorders? How did we get to a point where the total deaths from Alzheimer's have increased by 120% between the year 2000 and 2005, and that the Alzheimer's Association estimates that nearly 14 million Americans will have the disease by 2050. And don't forget about anxiety. Almost 18% of Americans are affected by anxiety disorders, and by all accounts, it's on the rise, especially within the younger generation. According to the American Psychological Association, 12% of millennials have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, which is almost double the percent compared to the baby boomer generation. And our young children don't have it any better. Let's talk about ADHD. In 1997, about 6% of children were diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And that number jumped to more than 10% in recent years. That's a 60% increase. It gets even worse. Did you know that suicide was the 10th leading cause of death in the United States last year? And that the life expectancy in the US dropped because of the rise in suicide and drug overdose in America. We're all familiar with the opioid epidemic, but did you know that there's a strong link between depression and the abuse of opioids? That studies have shown that a 1% increase in depression diagnoses was associated with a 26% increase in opioid-related deaths. Is this just now a fact of life? The new normal? Should we all just expect to get one form of a brain disorder or another? I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to accept that. We have to do something about this epidemic. There has to be another way. Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Hyman, and I'm the director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. I'm an 11 times New York Times bestselling author and a practicing family physician. I know what it's like to suffer from a broken brain. As a young physician, a cascade of events left me with a host of devastating brain disorders, including ADHD, depression, anxiety, and memory loss. I went from a happy, energetic, focused physician to someone who couldn't even remember the name of my patients. My story of recovery from these brain disorders was the foundation of my first docuseries, Broken Brain, which I had previously launched. Over 1 million people watched this docuseries and told me that it fundamentally changed their understanding of brain health. But what many people didn't know at the time was that I was silently suffering from my second big health crisis. I never thought it would happen to me again, but it did. A year before the launch of my first ever docuseries, I was bedridden, depressed, weak, physically and emotionally unavailable to everyone around me. It was the perfect storm of events. It all started when I tried to discover why I was having a lingering cough that wouldn't go away, which was really abnormal for me because I hardly ever get sick and don't have any lung issues. I went into a full-blown investigation and discovered that my 120-year-old barn that I converted into a house was filled with toxic mold that was wreaking havoc in my health and my brain. Now, soon after I discovered that I had mold toxicity, I had to take antibiotics for a past root canal that went bad. And this, of course, wrecked my gut health and was just the start of my challenges. Even though I knew that I didn't feel that great, I decided just to push through and continue on with my plans to go on vacation with my wife. Now, I was on this vacation through a freak accident that I broke my arm in a horrific way. It was so bad that my humerus actually split in half. Now, I'm already not feeling well from the mold, and then I break my arm, and then the pain from the accident was so intense that I had to take painkillers, anti-inflammatories, and the total combination of all these insults weakened my gut even further. But it was really, really bad. For months, I couldn't see patients. I was in and out of the hospital. I couldn't show up for my wife. I pretty much only had the energy to be in bed and watch Netflix. In all honesty, it was just the perfect storm of events that came together and left me feeling even worse than how I felt over 20 years ago when I suffered from my first episode of a broken brain. Now imagine this. I'm usually the doctor with all the answers. I'm the one that people come to get better. And suddenly, I was the patient and I needed to figure out how to heal. And I did. I not only reconnected with the foundational elements of functional medicine that I knew would get me better, but I discovered innovative therapies to treat the damage caused by the hidden infection that I had, by mold and other insults. I also used profound mind body techniques, including mindset practices, uncovering trauma, and the power of community to restore my resilience. And in this process, I tapped into the profound connection between our heart and our brain. I also dove deeper into the power of personalization and fine tuned the approach that was right for my genetic makeup. To say that I have so much to share with you is really an understatement. My story is the reason I decided to make Broken Brain 2, because there are so many more missing pieces to the puzzle. And the last 2 years have led me on a journey to discover these missing pieces. And now I want to share them with you. But my story isn't the only reason I've decided to create this docuseries. There are millions of people out there that can relate with their own story of a broken brain.
I started having symptoms around the time that I gave birth to my twin daughters. And I was extremely fatigued. I was crying a lot. I was losing my hair. I was having trouble sleeping. I was hearing things in my head. And I had extreme bouts of anxiety. I chalked it up to postpartum, but I didn't really know why. And nobody was being able to tell me why. And so I just kept going. And so over a span of 6 to 7 years, my symptoms not only multiplied into other areas, but they also increased in magnitude. I was gaining weight, didn't know why. My libido and my sex drive was non-existent. My fatigue had gotten to a point where I was literally falling asleep sitting up at the dinner table. And I'd have to put my chair back in my car in between dropping my daughters off at different activities and take a nap for that hour because I couldn't drive. That's how tired I was. I just had all these really weird symptoms that just kept on mounting. None of them were going away. They were just compiling. I was a corporate executive. I had 2 offices. I was traveling. I was trying to juggle all that. And my parents became terminally ill, so I became their caregiver. We moved while still juggling all of that. And then I saw my parents through their passing. And so the doctors looked at that and they said, "Oh, you're just depressed. Didn't do any blood tests, didn't do any of that. You're just depressed. Here's a prescription." Well, I took the pill, didn't feel any better. Went back, they gave me a different pill, and then a different pill, and I started getting worse. And then things just started complicating from there, and I was getting migraines, and I wasn't being able to get up out of bed because my migraines were so bad. When we moved up here in 2004, and I was about 43 or 44 by that time, I woke up one morning and I thought I'd had a stroke because my eye was closed and it was bulging, and obviously got really scared. Because we were brand new up here, I didn't have a medical team, and the only person that I knew was a chiropractor. And so we went to see the chiropractor, and he said, "Okay, Anna, I'd like to refer you to a naturopath. Would you go?" And I thought, well, first of all, I don't know what a naturopath is, but I do know that my other doctors for years have not been able to help me. So I'm going to give it a go. So I went to see the naturopath, and they explained to me that they were going to take blood panels because that's what they do. Their role is to look for the underlying causes of why I don't feel well. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So they took a bunch of blood, And I went back a few weeks later and I was absolutely blown away and astonished. And the doctor looked at me and she said, quite frankly, Anna, I don't know how you're standing. Let me explain to you what's going on with your body.
I was diagnosed with systemic inflammation and rheumatoid arthritis, and I was put on 3 different prescription medications to basically manage my symptoms. The symptoms impacted my daily life all day, every day, because all I did was manage them or react to them. So I would wake up exhausted. I would have 4 Advil for breakfast. I would force myself to go to work. Halfway through the day, I either had to stop working and come home. Every day I would get home just beat. I was stiff and achy and tired. And that's how I lived my life for many years. And sadly, I accepted that as normal. About a year after being on meds for my rheumatoid arthritis, I felt worse than I did before the medication. And I was seeing a rheumatologist every 2 months for evaluation. And after about a year of being on meds, I said to him, I feel worse. Like the pain is worse, the fatigue is worse, my weight is just ballooning. And he said, well, we should talk about injections, which is really upping the pharmaceutical ante. And I thought, oh, I can't do that. I didn't want to do that. And I realized at that time that I was really depressed, and it forced me to look at the medication I was taking. And I learned that one of the side effects of the medicine I was on was depression and thoughts of suicide, which I was feeling. I mean, I was miserable, I was suffering, and I would lay myself to sleep at night and think, would it be so bad if I just died in my sleep? If I could just be saved from this decline and suffering? It sounds dramatic, but that's how I was living.
I began having some symptoms that I just couldn't put my finger on. And one of those was I couldn't digest a lot of different foods that I normally was able to. I also was noticing that my hair was falling out in clumps in the shower when I'd wash it, which was very disturbing. I also was having brain fog so badly that sometimes I couldn't even remember what I was doing earlier in the day. And I just felt this general sense of anxiety all the time.
I noticed that I had a lot of fatigue, a lot of mental fatigue, and physical fatigue, even if I got a good night's sleep. But my sleep was disrupted, so I couldn't sleep. I had mental fatigue. I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. I had a hard time remembering things. It's not like I forgot them and they were gone. I just had a hard time finding them in my brain. And so it was really difficult. And every day I felt like my brain was on fire. I could actually feel my brain. And that seemed to just get worse over time.
In 2004, I was 14 years old and I had developed extreme fatigue. I couldn't stay awake for anything, whether that was football games or social events, various things that I needed to do to function. I could not show up for because I was constantly tired and sleeping my way through my life. And in addition to that, I was having cataplexies, which are mini seizures where my eyes would roll to the back of my head. The episodes would last for anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds, and they would happen about 20 times per day.
I have a scan of my brain from about 2000, and it shows holes in my brain. And the diagnosis was toxic brain damage from chemical exposure. I literally had a brain that wasn't working right because of toxic mold.
I started to develop anger issues and paranoia, and it was just, I didn't understand what was going on because growing up as a child, I didn't have any of those issues. I might get irritable or hangry if I didn't get enough food to eat or something like that, but I didn't have paranoia, I didn't have anger issues, I didn't have problems controlling my temper. I was like, what's going on? And so I did a history of my own life, and I realized that all those symptoms started to creep up after that initial head injury. And here I am, a specialist in post-concussion syndrome, And I didn't even realize that I was dealing with the symptoms of post-concussion syndrome.
It wasn't really until I was in my early 20s that I had a massive emotional trauma that my brain broke. And all of a sudden, I started experiencing severe depression, recurring anxiety attacks that took place every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. My hair started falling out in chunks. My teenage acne exploded all over my face and body. And I was really at a loss as to what was going on. And I thought, this can't be normal. This can't be fine. Anywhere I tried to seek help, whoever I tried to ask for answers, they wouldn't really listen to me. They wouldn't validate what was going on with me. They would take one look at me, a 20-something-year-old, educated young woman, and they'd say, "You look fine. You look great. Go enjoy your life. Stop being so dramatic about everything." When I look back now, I'm shocked that none of those doctors even attempted to run a blood test on me or a stool test or a saliva test to see what was actually going on underneath. They sort of just dismissed it as, "You're young, you look healthy, you look good enough, everything should be fine." So it was really difficult for me at such a young age and not having a background or experience in healthcare to really understand what was going on. So I spiraled out of control, thinking the worst, thinking there's something looming over me.
To be completely honest, looking back now, I don't know when the symptoms started because I have been sick for so long. And it's only now that I am able to say that because I feel so incredible. I don't remember the last time that I felt this way. I will say that it peaked when I had terrible psoriasis and eczema, and I had terrible brain fog, sleeping issues, excessive sweating, just terrible cognitive function. I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I've struggled so much with that.
So the symptoms that I had, that I've now realized have existed for a long time based on the lifestyle and the food that I was eating, very much were multifaceted. So there were physical components, there were cognitive, emotional, and then there was the mental clarity. I very frequently had headaches. Insomniac. I had a lot of difficulty sleeping. I was having frequent stomach aches and overall just lethargy. I was overall just exhausted, muscles achy even when I wasn't working out. I used to play college volleyball. I'm like, I should not be this sore right now. And my body would just ache and just feeling exhaustion. And so that led also, that connected very much to my emotional, mental clarity and stability. So I very much had what a lot of psychiatrists have said, the classic symptomology of ADHD. I've actually had 2 psychiatrists tell me my face should be next to the DSM, next to ADHD and the DSM. So my rapid thought, rapid speech, my lack of short-term memory, that had gotten much, much worse in the last 2 years, actually, to the point I was very concerned. It would be short-term memory within a sentence. I would forget what I was saying. It would be short-term memory loss of something we talked about an hour ago, something we talked about a day ago, that would be gone. And it was very frustrating to me, especially working. I work with kids with autism, so I work with families. I have moved a lot, so I have friends I'm keeping in contact with, and all of those things were affected, of course, because if your memory's not there to return a call, you're impeding your relationships.
In May of last year, my daughter got mono or Epstein-Barr virus and felt ill very quickly and was experiencing troubled breathing. That's how I really noticed it, is that she started snoring at night and she was really swollen and had difficulty breathing. And I took her to the hospital and had her tested, and it took a week to get the results back. And it did turn out that she had the Epstein-Barr virus and she had mono, but it progressed to a place where her behavior started to shift and she started saying things that were more negative. So she started saying things like, "I hate myself, I hate you." She was getting really frustrated. She was acting out aggressively, which, because it was so slow, you're kind of thinking, what's going on with her? And I felt like I was being disregarded when I was talking about the fact that I felt that this was neuroinflammation. but I truly believed. There was this breaking point where we had that quintessential, like, terrible two moment in a grocery store where I literally could not escape. And she was screaming, I hate myself. And it was just that moment of, this is not right. This is not my child. I know this is not her, and we need to figure this out. And information comes when you need it most. And even though I'm a naturopathic doctor, it was slow and insidious. It was not like a PANDAS situation where overnight your child's behavior changed or they become nonverbal. It was slow. And when I was researching around, I decided that I really felt that it was due to the Epstein-Barr and that she had neuroinflammation.
With all the advancements in modern medicine, why are we still seeing a growing number of broken brains? It's estimated that over $600 billion have been spent by drug companies looking for the magic bullet to treat Alzheimer's and dementia-related brain disorders. Now, out of all that investment, there are very few drugs for Alzheimer's that have made it into the market, and there are deep concerns about their efficacy. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association showed that through a meta-analysis looking at all the studies, that not only do these medications lack effectiveness, that means they don't work, but some of them were correlated with a faster rate of decline. In other words, $600 billion of investment has resulted in no good treatments. These drugs are all being developed under the idea that Alzheimer's is caused by one thing. So they focus solely on fixing that one thing or one pathway with a drug. But what if Alzheimer's, dementia, ADD, depression, or anxiety is not just one thing? What if all these brain disorders are caused by multiple factors, all interacting to create brain damage?
Well, I'm Dale Bredesen, and I'm a professor at UCLA and was founding president and CEO of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging and author of The End of Alzheimer's. What we found is that what we call Alzheimer's disease is actually a protective response. It's really a protective downsizing response to multiple different insults. In previous studies of Alzheimer's and treatments, people would always try to treat without understanding what's actually causing it. So they would give you a drug that doesn't have anything to do with why you have Alzheimer's disease. So after the research, for the first time, we were able to say, here are the things that actually drive this process. And you can see that what's at the heart of Alzheimer's disease is actually a molecular switch that is integrating and looking at all sorts of potential insults, and on the other hand, all sorts of potential positives. If it's inflammation, that can be from Borrelia, that can be from various organisms, it can be from leaky gut. If it is trophic loss of nerve growth factor, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, hormones, nutrients. If it's glycotoxicity, so you have insulin resistance, or if it's toxicity from metallotoxins, organic toxins, or biotoxins such as mycotoxins. These things are all contributors. So the whole purpose of the protocol is to identify all of the contributors, and we typically find that people have between 10 and 25. It's usually not one. And then we want to trigger and want to look at each of those and target each of those contributors. So if you have a high homocysteine, we want to bring it down. If you have a leaky gut, we want to heal that.
What are we going to do? This is an unbelievable breakthrough in the understanding of how our brain functions and what we can do to make it the most healthy.
In Broken Brain 2, we're going to be talking about a different toxin that can impact our brain's plasticity. And that toxin is toxic beliefs. I can't tell you how many patients I've seen who seem to be doing everything right, such as eating the right foods, taking the right supplements, exercising, and yet it just can't seem to get better. As a functional medicine doctor, I believe it's my role and my duty to look at the whole picture, not just what my patients are eating or if they're exercising enough. I truly believe that if your spirit is broken, if your connection to yourself and your values have become shaken, that you can become ill. Our experts will help you understand why toxic beliefs are so harmful and how to reconnect with your intentions and build a mindset that's ripe for healing.
So our unconscious beliefs are essentially patterns that we have, and these patterns are operating at a level lower than our conscious patterns. So we might think a certain way, but our unconscious patterns determine how we will actually behave and how we will respond to certain situations. The best way I can describe your conscious and unconscious patterns or beliefs is like the steering in your car. So our mindset and our conscious beliefs are when we have our hands on the wheels. When we let go, that's our unconscious beliefs. So what happens when we don't have to constantly control our thoughts and our minds? That the pattern that we go into, that's how I would describe our unconscious beliefs. One of the ways that we see this showing up quite a bit is in our patients and in the people that we coach is in their limbic programming. So the limbic part of our brain is part of our reptilian brain. And this part of our brain has to make a decision of whether or not a situation is stressful or not stressful. The limbic brain, because of that responsibility, if it's programmed correctly, will serve us. If it's programmed incorrectly, will not serve us. So two people can be presented with the exact same stressor, but one person's unconscious belief patterns and limbic programming will determine whether they go into a state of fight or flight or whether they go into a state of rest and relaxation. So you could have two people but have a completely different physiological response. And so what we find a lot of times is changing somebody's behavior isn't very easy because of those unconscious beliefs. And it's going to show up the same way because of what they believe or what their brain believes deep down inside, and that's the decision maker. Our limbic brain processes information before our conscious brain processes information. So the physiological response takes place before we even understand what's happening. For example, if a lion were to walk in this room, our limbic brain is going to create a physiological response instantaneously, and the stress hormones are already going to be flooding through our body before we even realize there's a lion in the room. So some people, based on their unconscious programming of a specific situation, might have a catastrophic stress response, whereas the person standing next to them may have no response whatsoever because of their past experiences or the emotion that they've attached to that particular situation.
In Broken Brain 2, we're also going to be discussing the role of trauma. We often think of trauma as being memory-based, and that simply thinking of a traumatic event can re-trigger the pain. But did you know that the impact of trauma is less about the memory, but about our body's physiological response to the memory? As our understanding of trauma goes deeper, we're beginning to understand that trauma isn't just stored in the brain, it's stored in the body.
So when it comes to adverse childhood experiences, just because an event is over, it's done, that traumatic experience is not happening anymore, doesn't mean that it's internally resolved within your nervous system, because sounds, smells, internal memories, sensations that come up that might remind you of that trauma that you went through can trigger the entire survival response again, causing you to fight, be irritable, right, with others when it doesn't quite make sense, or have the sensation to run, to flee, to get out of there, not trust people, or to freeze, so overwhelmed that you shut down. This is why internally resolving that experience is so important. We teach our nervous system how to differentiate immediate real danger from discomfort and stress.
While talk therapy can play an important part in addressing trauma, on its own, it often isn't enough. In our series, we'll talk about the modern modalities out there that can help the healing process from traumatic events and from our past and give our body a sense of resilience.
I work with a lot of patients who've had physical traumas to their brain, from concussions or even bad car accidents. In addition, though, I've worked with a lot of patients who have had emotional traumas. They didn't necessarily come to my office because they had an emotional trauma, but through an in-depth comprehensive history, I might have found like, wow, one of the key areas that we need to help support in you is your emotional brain, because that could be one of the major root causes for your symptoms. The way I found is most effective is a very straightforward progression. Number one, we have to make sure that your physical brain is healthy and strong. And so by doing things like sensory-based therapies and advanced brain-based technologies, Number two, by stabilizing your chemical brain with specialized diets and personalized supplements and lifestyle recommendations. And the most beautiful thing happens many times when the physical brain, the chemical brain is stabilized, then either a lot of the emotional traumas start to fall to the wayside, or my patients have more resources in their nervous system to be able to process the emotional traumas.
By now, the gut-brain connection is quite well understood, but the gut isn't the only system in the body that has direct communication to the brain. In Broken Brain 2, we'll be exploring the heart-brain connection and how tapping into this connection and improving the coherence between these two important organs could be part of what it takes to help us get to the root of anxiety-related disorders.
This idea of the heart-brain connection I find to be very fascinating, and I would even extend it into the head, the heart, and the gut. If we look at ancient traditions, there's a sense of the hara, or the gut, that much of our awareness instinctually is felt here in the belly, right? When we feel uneasy about something, anxious, irritable, impatient, oftentimes we get that flutter down here. The heart can also pick up a lot of these sensations, right? And then we have the brain as the processor. So if we look into the science, there are three main concepts that connect to head, heart, and gut in a unifying way. And they're all about establishing flow, which is what this Broken Brain series is about. Truly, is how do we create flow rather than brokenness or fragmentation? And this is one of the hallmarks of healthy aging.
We know that stress plays a major role in chronic disease and the health of our brain. In this episode, we'll also help you understand the power of an important tool for improving your heart and brain health and significantly reducing stress. It's called HeartMath.
Most people know what heart rate is, right? How many times does the heart beat in a minute? It's heart rate. But in reality, in a healthy person, somebody who's resilient, our heart rate is actually changing with each and every heartbeat. And that's going on all the time, whether we're sitting still, asleep, and that's what's called heart rate variability. So we have to measure with much more precision to do that, and the time between each pair of heartbeats, and those changing patterns. So that's what's actually underlying what's called the heart rhythm. And most people know we have a heart rhythm without really knowing what that means. But if the time between each pair of heartbeats were the same, the heart rhythm would be a flat line, there wouldn't be a rhythm. So the rhythm is always changing. And when I talk about coherence, we're really talking about the pattern in the heart rhythm. Now, if we're feeling something like frustration or impatience, anxiety, especially these types of emotions, the heart's rhythm becomes very chaotic looking. Right? If you might have seen on TV what earthquakes look like, the seismographs, it looks very similar to that. So it's a very chaotic looking rhythm. And this quite literally reflects that the activity in our brain, in our nervous system, is out of sync in a measurable way. It's a very inefficient state. We're using a lot of extra energy when we're in that incoherent state. So it just turns out that the heart rhythm is the easiest way to reflect what's happening within the whole body.
Your heart doesn't lie. It really does tell you what's happening with your autonomic nervous system. It's telling you about your function, your functionality. How is parasympathetic, the rest and digest, comparing to sympathetic, which is ramping you up and allowing us to respond to something. So with the heart, what we want is increased heart rate variability, the ability to respond in every moment with this fluidity.
What we have always known is that the brain regulates and talks to every single system and organ in the body. It's sort of, I'd say, the dictator. What is interesting now is we're finding out that there's more messaging going to the brain from the heart than the other way around. So that's sort of a newer discovery that in medical school I wasn't taught. I always thought that the brain tells everyone what to do. But the discovery that there's more firing of afferent pathways, meaning the messages are going from the heart to the brain, is sort of new.
We'll also dive into another connection that conventional medicine is only beginning to understand, the immune-brain connection. Did you know that we have an immune system in our brain? How do things like immune dysfunction affect our brain? What can we do about it? You'll find out more in this episode.
The immune system is not located in any one specific place in the body. The immune system is sort of everywhere. It's in our blood vessels. So we have the vascular part of the immune system with different types of white blood cells, and then we have the immune system in the tissues of the body. And specifically in the brain, we think of the brain as full of neurons. Well, there's not only neurons in the brain, but there's also what are called glial cells. And our glial cells are the glue that hold the whole brain together. And in fact, most physicians probably forgot about glial cells because when they go to medical school, you're taught about the neurons and neuronal synapses. And only 10% of the brain is actually neurons. Most of the brain is glial cells. And part of the glial cells are these cells called microglia, which are derived from the immune system embryologically. So when people have inflammation in the body, either in the gut or from some type of a systemic virus, Epstein-Barr virus, HIV, it can activate the microglial cells, and then they in turn cause inflammation in the brain, which over time is like the brain on fire, and that can cause neurodegenerative conditions that manifest clinically as mood issues, cognitive issues, etc.
When we look at data from the World Health Organization, we realize now, this day, globally, what's killing people more than anything else are called chronic degenerative conditions. It's not an infection, it's not war, it's not some new virus that has mutated. It's chronic degenerative conditions, things like Alzheimer's, coronary artery disease, diabetes, and even cancer. And what we understand about these diseases is they are united in terms of their mechanism. There is one mechanism at the root of each and every one of these conditions that, again, represents the number one cause of death on planet Earth, and that mechanism is inflammation. So inflammation has two sides. Acute inflammation might be the inflammation that you might experience after a mosquito bite or after you fall and hurt yourself and break your arm. That inflammation is involved in clearing debris and getting rid of organisms and helping speed the healing process. But when that inflammation becomes chronic or ongoing over a period of time, it is a fire that needs to be put out. In fact, that's where the word comes from. Inflammation, inflammar, means to light on fire. And that is the root of these conditions. Alzheimer's is a prototypic inflammatory disorder. Alzheimer's is inflammation of the brain, like Parkinson's is inflammation of the brain. So we have to do everything we can to recognize that, not necessarily in terms of treatment, but in terms of the front end. What can we do? What kind of life can we live to reduce inflammation and reduce our chances of developing one of these issues? New research demonstrates that when you look at markers in the blood of inflammation in people in their 30s, and then follow these people up 3 decades later, those individuals in their 30s and 40s that had higher levels of inflammation markers in their blood have a dramatic increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. What does that mean? It means that this message about Alzheimer's disease and its prevention is something that 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds need to be listening to. When people now notice that their cognitive function is declining, that their memory resources are declining, that their ability to plan for the future is declining, that's almost too late. There are important things that can be done. But John Kennedy said that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. And that causes us to focus on the central role of prevention as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. Again, a disease for which there is no treatment.
In this series, we'll also focus on personalization. Aside from a few universal rules that we can all follow when it comes to our diet, we know that there isn't one perfect diet for everyone. And that's why personalizing your diet to fit your needs is so important. What works for you might not work for someone else, and vice versa. So how can we personalize our diets and lifestyles to fit our unique needs? Join our experts for a lesson on our genes and how we can use innovative testing, as well as home methods to personalize our diets.
Well, we share a lot in common as human beings, but we also have important differences. We have different genes, different gene expression, different We live in different places, we have different lifestyles, we have different goals, and all of that will affect what an optimal diet is for each individual. So if you imagine someone who is a sedentary office worker who's 60 pounds overweight and has type 2 diabetes, the approach for that person would be different than someone who is an 18-year-old Olympic athlete training for a competition. And that, when I explain that to most people, they get it immediately. They say, yeah, that's obvious. But if you look at dietary recommendations and nutritional research, they don't actually reflect that focus on individuality and the need to customize recommendations based on our individual circumstances and needs.
Finally, I'll walk you through all the innovative and cutting-edge therapies that I've discovered on my own healing journey. These are revolutionary tools that have truly been miraculous for me and thousands of others.
Ozone therapy can boost mitochondrial function. Per Dr. Schallenberger, who is an authority in ozone treatment, states that ozone is able to stress mitochondria and therefore stimulate it to use oxygen more effectively. Ozone can help with brain recovery after a stroke. Through its mild oxidative stress, it forms something called lipoperoxides, which can cross the blood-brain barrier, and that where there's a huge concentration of mitochondria in the brain. So these mitochondria can get activated in order to utilize oxygen more efficiently, which is important when you have damaged areas with decreased perfusion of oxygen. Also has been shown to increase blood flow, and this is also important with stroke when you have lower levels of blood flow to these damaged areas.
We'll also walk you through the ways that you can optimize your brain health at home. And we'll put it all together in our final episode, The Brain Reset, in which we'll outline a comprehensive mind-body approach to achieving your best brain. This is the comprehensive approach also to achieving your best health. And we'll talk about community and spirit. We'll talk about emotional health and mindset practice and purpose. We'll talk about body and movement, nutrition, and relationships. And we'll present practical ways to address each of these important aspects of your health.
The key to living an extraordinary life depends on our brain health. Because if your brain isn't working, if your brain is broken, there's no way you can live a full life. And so the three pillars to brain health are your physical brain, your chemical brain, and your emotional brain. The first pillar to brain health is your physical brain. And what I mean by that, I'm referring to the structure of your actual brain, like the different connections between your brain cells and what we call neural networks. The second pillar of brain health is your chemical brain. And that's the neurochemical milieu that your physical brain exists in. It's the chemical environment. And finally, the third pillar to brain health is your emotional brain. And that refers more to your mindset, because the thoughts we think and the beliefs that we hold profoundly impact not only our health, but they do so by turning on or off genes leading to brain health or brain disease. And so the beautiful thing is, based on this information, again, you have the ability to take charge of the genetic destiny of your brain and create a life worth living.
We have studies on ophthalmological health that show that eyes that fix at a certain distance for long periods of time tend to lose their ability to look over long distances. You're more likely to need glasses if you spend your whole life looking at a computer screen. Well, guess what? The same is true with your brain. You need to engage, you need to take in the vastness, the magnificence, the wonder of the world. And so get out, exercise, play, enjoy, do the things that bring you alive. And when you do that, your brain will be stimulated, it will grow, its capacity to take in new information will grow. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, don't be an old dog. Be a living, breathing, growing human being who learns to the very end of your days. Your brain will thank you. It will light up. You're only as old as you decide you are. You know, you can become an elder without becoming an older, because you can grow in wisdom and yet you keep on learning.
In this docuseries, I've asked experts to share actual exercises that you can do at home. Breathing exercises, movement exercises, community building exercises, and belief exercises. We are taking a hands-on approach to brain health this time, and I know you're gonna love it. 2 years ago, I was at one of the lowest points in my life, and it was a wake-up call. Not only was this period of my life physically draining, but I also had to confront a lot of trauma, limiting beliefs that I held, and stress that I'd not been dealing with. I wasn't that superhuman that I learned I should be in medical school that could push for months and months and without any rest or reset. I was a human whose body and mind needed to slow down and discover what was causing my body and brain to break down and what I could do about it. I went on a healing journey to pull myself out of this mess the same way I did over 20 years ago. I incorporated the core principles of functional medicine and I learned much, much more. And now I'm presenting all this information to you. If you love Broken Brain, you're going to love Broken Brain too. We're going to go even deeper so we can achieve our best brain health together. Thanks for watching. See you next time for episode 2, where we go deep into the topic of toxins that are wreaking havoc on our brains and our bodies. Thank you for watching Broken Brain 2. Now, I know just how powerful this information can be on your healing journey, and others might benefit from it too. If you know someone who would benefit from this information, you can share this docuseries by clicking the link below.